25 Cromwell Street was an ordinary house. A 3-storey terrace in the middle of a row of them in the Midland Road district of Gloucester. A working part of the city, close to the centre. A short walk from the bus station and the park. Bay window at the front. A small yard at the back. The kind of house a city has thousands of, and walks past without seeing. Fred and Rose West moved into it in the autumn of 1972. They would live there for the next 22 years. It was a house with people coming and going all the time. The Wests took in lodgers. The top floors were let out cheap, £7 a week. Advertised in the Gloucester Citizen and passed on by word of mouth. Young people mostly. The house was always full. There was always someone on the stairs. And there was always work being done to it. Fred West was a builder by trade, of a sort. Labouring jobs, conversions, odd contracts, and he worked in his own house constantly. He dug out the cellar, he concreted the garden, he extended, partitioned, refloored. Neighbours grew used to the sound of it. A man improving his property. Nothing a street would think to remark on. For 22 years, the city of Gloucester walked past 25 Cromwell Street and saw an ordinary house. A married couple, a lot of children, a lot of lodgers, a husband who was always building. This film is about what the city walked past. It is not about what happened inside that house. It's about everything that happened outside it. The records that existed, the contacts that were made, the moments when the evidence was in someone's hands and the house was allowed to go on standing. Frederick Walter Stephen West was born on the 29th of September 1941 in Marcle, a village in Herefordshire, 14 miles from Gloucester. His father was a farm labourer. Fred left school at 15, barely able to read or write, and went to work on the land. His criminal record began in 1961. In April of that year, he appeared at Ledbury Magistrates Court on charges of theft. He was fined £4. 2 months later, in June 1961, his 13-year-old sister told their mother that Fred had been raping her since the previous December, that he had made her pregnant. Fred was arrested. When police questioned him, he admitted freely to molesting young girls. He is reported to have said, "Doesn't everybody do it?" He was tried at Herefordshire Assizes. The child refused to give evidence. The case collapsed. Fred walked free. This is the first entry in the record. A court had Fred West before it. He had confessed. The case collapsed because a traumatised child could not face the man who had abused her across a courtroom. The hearing happened. The record of it exists. Fred West was 20 years old. He found work. A labourer, then an ice cream van driver, the jobs of a man with no trade and no schooling, moving from one to the next. In 1962, he met Catherine Costello, known as Rena, a Scottish woman with her own criminal history. She was pregnant with another man's child when they married. The child was a daughter, Charmaine. Her father was not named on her birth certificate. The Wests had a second daughter together, Anne-Marie, born in 1964. The marriage was violent from the start. Rena left and returned. Left and returned. By 1967, Fred was living in a caravan in Gloucestershire with the children and a woman named Anna McFall. She had been a friend of Rena's. She had become Fred's lover, and she was pregnant with his child. She was 18 years old, and by the accounts of those who knew her, she wanted Fred to leave Rena and marry her. That year, a probation officer filed a report expressing concern about the children being looked after by Anna McFall. A copy was placed in the files of the local social services. No further action is recorded. In July 1967, Anna McFall disappeared. Her body was found in 1994, buried in a field near the caravan site. She was pregnant when she was killed. The child died with her. She had not been reported to the police as a missing person. Nobody had come to look for her, despite the anxious note left years before in the files of the local social services. Her disappearance was on record before it happened. It was never resolved. The probation officer's report is the second entry. A professional, in writing, in 1967, set down a concern about children in Fred West's household. The paper was filed. The children stayed where they were. Rosemary Pauline Letts was born on the 29th of November 1953 in Barnstaple, Devon. She was the fifth of 7 children born to Bill and Daisy Letts. Bill Letts was a violent and controlling man. He subjected his family to a regime of fear and physical punishment. Daisy Letts received electroconvulsive therapy during her pregnancy with Rose. Rose grew up in a household where violence was the operating norm, not an event, but the weather. By her early teens, she was a girl other children found strange, marked out at school, withdrawn, drawn to much younger children and to much older men. She was 15 years old when she met Fred West at a bus stop in Cheltenham in November 1968. He was 27. He had 2 children. He had a wife. He had convictions. He had a history that ran back to a courtroom and a confession. Her father did not miss what was happening. Bill Letts went to Gloucestershire Social Services and told them directly that his 15-year-old daughter was involved with a much older man. Social Services suggested that Rose be taken into care to keep her away from Fred. She was taken into care. She continued to see Fred regardless. When Bill discovered this, he confronted Fred himself. Nothing changed. That is the third entry. A father walked into a council office and named the danger his daughter was in. The danger had a name, an age gap, and a criminal record. The system's response was to move the child, briefly, and then to let the matter close. By late 1969, Rose had moved into Fred's home on Midland Road, Gloucester. She was 16. He was 28. The at-risk register, introduced in 1967, specifying that very young parents should be monitored, should have flagged the situation. Gloucestershire County Council's own later report into the West case acknowledged that, in the council's words, vital communication between departments occurred less frequently then than it does now. Fred was sent to prison for theft in late 1970. He served 9 months. During those 9 months, Rose was alone in the house with 3 small children. Anne-Marie, who was Fred's, her own infant daughter, Heather, born in October 1970, and Charmaine. Charmaine West was not Rose's child, and not Fred's. She was Rena's daughter by another man. She was a striking child, dark-haired, dark-eyed, self-possessed in a way that the adults around her noticed and remembered. She was 7 years old when Fred went to prison, and she was left in the care of a 16-year-old who who was not her mother and did not want her. In the summer of 1971, Charmaine West was murdered. She was 8 years old. Rose killed her. Fred was still in prison when it happened. After the murder, Rose informed Charmaine's school, St James's Junior School in Gloucester, that Charmaine had gone to live with her real mother. The school did not verify it. In the attendance register, the reason given for Charmaine's departure was recorded as moved to London. Under the system in operation at the time, schools had no obligation to confirm that a child leaving their care had arrived safely at a new school and been registered. If no request for the file came from a new head teacher, the file was kept for the statutory 3 years and then destroyed. That is what happened to Charmaine's file. An 8-year-old child was murdered, and the only document the state held on her was closed, retained for 3 years, and shredded, exactly as the procedure required. The last official act in the life of Charmaine West was an attendance register being brought up to date. Fred and Rose married on the 29th of January 1972 at Gloucester Register Office. On the marriage certificate, Fred described himself incorrectly as a bachelor. Later that year, they moved to 25 Cromwell Street. It was bigger than Midland Road. 3 stories, room enough to take in lodgers, room enough for a growing family. It was a step up. To the people who knew them, it looked like a young couple making good. In October 1972, the Wests took on a nanny. Caroline Owens was 17 years old. She came from Cinderford in the Forest of Dean. One of 15 children. Not happy at home, not close to her stepfather, looking for work and a way out. The Wests offered her exactly that. A live-in job minding their children. £3 a week, a lift home to her mother's every Tuesday. They did it properly. They drove out to Cinderford and met Caroline's mother, Elizabeth. They brought their own children with them. They presented themselves as what they appeared to be. A respectable, young, married couple. Hard-working. A house full of children of their own. Elizabeth Owens looked at them and saw nothing to worry about. Caroline took the job. She thought the West children were sweet. She shared a room with Anne-Marie, who was 8, and she noticed early that Anne-Marie was quiet and watchful whenever her parents were in the room, a child who was frightened in her own home. Caroline noticed it. She did not yet understand it. She noticed other things. Fred talked about sex constantly, compulsively. He claimed to carry out operations. Abortions, he said. He made a remark that implied Anne-Marie was no longer a virgin, and then covered it with a lie about a bicycle accident. Caroline decided she did not want the job. She decided to leave. On the 6th of December 1972, Fred and Rose West abducted her. They knew her routine. They had watched her in Gloucester earlier that day. That evening, they picked her up at the spot where she usually waited for a lift, and Rose climbed into the back of the car with her, friendly, chatting, a girl's conversation. Fred drove out into dark countryside and stopped the car. He called Caroline a name. He punched her unconscious. She came round, bound and gagged with tape. They drove her back to 25 Cromwell Street, took her upstairs, and across that night, both of them assaulted her. Fred West raped her. When a visitor knocked at the door the next morning, Rose held a pillow over Caroline's face to keep her silent. Caroline Owens survived that house by pretending. She told the Wests she forgave them. She told them she would stay. that she would come back to work as their nanny, that none of it needed to go any further. To make it convincing, she did the housework. She did the vacuuming. She played with Anne-Marie and with Heather. And when Fred drove her and Rose into Gloucester the following day and stopped to park the car, Caroline walked into a laundrette, then kept walking and got away. Her mother saw the bruising on her face. The truth came out. Elizabeth Owens went to the police. The police took it seriously. They interviewed Rose, who was openly hostile. They searched the car and the house. They found a button from Caroline's coat in the car. They found a part-used roll of brown tape in the lounge. They found pornographic photographs. Fred and Rose West were arrested and charged. The case was heard at Gloucester Magistrates Court on Friday the 12th of January 1973. Caroline Owens could not face giving evidence against the people who had done this to her. The most serious charge, rape, could not be pursued without her testimony. The Wests agreed to plead guilty to lesser charges. In court, the defence presented them as a sympathetic young couple with several children to care for. The magistrates retired. They decided that Fred's previous convictions had no relevance to the case before them. They considered him docile, a man who did not look capable of violence. The police officers who had handled the arrest agreed with that assessment. Rose had no criminal history, and she was pregnant. The chairman of the bench, John Smith, returned to the courtroom. "We do not think that sending you to prison will do you any good." Fred and Rose West were convicted on 2 charges: assault occasioning actual bodily harm and indecent assault. They were fined £25 on each, £50 per defendant. They were allowed to walk out of the court. Gloucestershire Constabulary's own account of the inquiry, written years later, records the conviction and the fine. It also records what happened to the evidence: the police prosecution file, the statements, the witness accounts, the reasoning behind which charges were brought, was destroyed afterwards in accordance with the force policy of the time. Only the bare record of conviction now survives. When Caroline Owens was told the outcome, she said, "It made me feel like I wasn't worth anything." Shortly afterwards, she attempted to take her own life. There is one more thing that the record establishes about that night in December 1972, and it did not emerge until much later. In 1994, questioned by police, Fred West described the attack on Caroline Owens as a test, a trial run. He wanted to know whether Rose could be relied on to help him take a girl. He made it plain what the test was for, and what the intended outcome of the real thing would have been. Caroline Owens did not survive a one-off. She survived a rehearsal. 3 months after John Smith told the Wests that prison would do them no good, they killed for the first time as a couple. Her name was Lynda Gough. She was 19 years old. Lynda Gough worked as a seamstress at the Co-op in Gloucester. She knew Cromwell Street. She had friendships with some of the lodgers, and she had occasionally babysat for the Wests. When Caroline Owens left, the West suggested to Lynda that she move in and take the nanny's place. In the spring of 1973, she did. She left her parents a note. "Dear Mum and Dad, please don't worry about me. I have got a flat and I will come and see you sometime. Love, Lynn." Her parents read it and decided to let her have her independence for a while. She was 19. She would be back. Lynda Gough was murdered at 25 Cromwell Street. On the third Saturday after Lynda left home, her mother, June Gough, went looking for her. She asked around the town. She spoke to Lynda's friends. She spoke to a supervisor at Lynda's work, and what she gathered led her eventually to the door of 25 Cromwell Street. Rose West answered it. June Gough recognised her. She had seen this woman before. The woman had taken her daughter out for a drink. The two of them stood and talked on the doorstep. June Gough was looking at a woman wearing her daughter's slippers. On the washing line in the yard behind the house were her daughter's clothes. Rose West said that Lynda had stayed there for a time but had moved on. Gone to Weston-super-Mare, the Wests would say. June Gough did not know what she was standing in front of. She walked away from the door. It would be 21 years before June Gough learned what happened to her daughter. She made inquiries of her own. She contacted organisations, the Salvation Army among them. But Lynda Gough was never registered with the police as a missing person. There was never an organised search. For years afterwards, June Gough's route to the shops took her along Cromwell Street, past the house, until one day she noticed the cellar entrance had been bricked up, felt a dread she could not explain, and never walked that way again. 4 months after Fred and Rose West walked out of Gloucester Magistrates Court, they had abducted, murdered, and disposed of a young woman. Lynda Gough was the first. She was not the last. Over the 6 years that followed, the murders at and around 25 Cromwell Street settled into a pattern. And the pattern had a terrible consistency to it. A young woman, often alone, often already at the edges of where anyone was looking for her, and then no report, no search, no inquiry. In November 1973, Caroline Cooper. She was 15. She had been living in a children's home in Worcester. She was last seen getting on a bus after an evening out. The home she lived in was the body that would have had to raise the alarm for her. In December 1973, Lucy Partington. She was 21. A university student home with her family for Christmas. She left a friend's house to catch a bus and did not arrive home. Lucy Partington's family reported her missing at once. Hers was the disappearance that was looked for. It made no difference to where she had gone. In April 1974, Therese Siegenthaler. She was 21. A sociology student from Switzerland living in London. She set out to hitchhike to Ireland. The gap between London and the people expecting her was wide enough that her disappearance took time to even register. In November 1974, Shirley Hubbard. She was 15. She was in a work placement from her school in Droitwich. She had been living with foster parents. In April 1975, Juanita Mott. She was 18. She had lived at Cromwell Street herself as a lodger, and then moved out to nearby Newent. She had drifted away from her family. She was last seen hitchhiking. In May 1978, Shirley Robinson. She was 18. She was a lodger at Cromwell Street, and she was pregnant with Fred West's child. She was buried in the garden of the house, and her unborn child was buried with her. And in August 1979, Alison Chambers. She was 16. She was a girl in the care of the local authority, living in a children's home in Gloucester, from which she went missing. 8 young women and girls across 6 years. Caroline Cooper and Alison Chambers were in the care of the state when they were killed. Shirley Hubbard was a child in a foster placement. Juanita Mott had been a lodger in the house itself. Each of them, when she vanished, vanished into a silence. And in almost every case, no missing person investigation ever began. A court in Gloucester had Fred and Rose West before it in January 1973. It had the evidence. It had the charges. It had a survivor who had reported in detail what was done to her. It fined them £50 each and sent them home. Each name on that list belongs, in part, to that decision. Cromwell Street was not a sealed environment. It is the thing the case most wants you to assume, and the thing the record most flatly refuses. A house where this was happening for this long must have been closed, hidden, cut off. It was the opposite. It was one of the busiest addresses in the district. It had lodgers, a constant traffic of them, in and out, year after year. It had neighbours on both sides and across the street. It had social workers who visited. It had children who went to school every morning and came home every afternoon. It had a man at the centre of it who was known to half of Gloucester. Fred West. Talkative. Familiar. Always working, always ready with a story. The signals were there. Repeatedly. For years. What the record does not show is any single point at which the signals were gathered into one place and read together. Start with the lodgers, because the lodgers are where the house's real character shows. The top 2 floors of 25 Cromwell Street were let out cheap. As little as £7 a week, advertised in the Gloucester Citizen and passed along by word of mouth. The rooms attracted the people cheap rooms attract, the young, the transient, the estranged, runaways, people who had come adrift from their families and needed somewhere that asked no questions. For some of them, the house was exactly what it looked like, a cheap room in a chaotic, crowded household. And they stayed a while and moved on, and were fine. One of them, years later, described being woken in the night by screaming from elsewhere in the building. She lay still in the dark. She left the next morning. She did not report it. She has since said, who was going to believe a 17-year-old? That question has an answer. Caroline Owens was 17. She did report it, and the system's response was £50 and a walk home. The lodgers also brought police to the door, repeatedly in the early years, and never once for the reason that mattered. Through the early 70s, across 1972 and into 1973, the year of the Caroline Owens hearing and the year the killing began, Gloucestershire police were inside 25 Cromwell Street more than once. 2 drug warrants were executed at the address in that period on flats within the house. Through the early 70s, the house saw at least 3 unannounced visits from the drug squad. One of them ended in the lodger's arrest. The drug squad officers became familiar faces. The West knew them by sight. It is part of why, over time, the West narrowed their lettings to young women only. The male lodgers and their habits were drawing exactly the kind of official attention the house could not afford. Gloucestershire Constabulary's own account confirms the warrants. It also confirms that no records of those visits now survive, except for the entries in one retired officer's pocketbook. Police had been through the door of 25 Cromwell Street in the first years of the murders. The paper that would say what they saw, and when, no longer exists. A little under a mile from Cromwell Street, on Upton Lane, stood Jordan's Brook house. It was a children's home. A secure community home for adolescent girls, most of them already in the care of the local authority. Many of them already moved on from other institutions. Girls labelled difficult. Girls who had absconded before. Girls from troubled and violent homes. They were admitted around 15 and a half. The regime was strict. Behaviour graded every week, the grades posted up at Friday tea time, curfews, mail opened and read, boyfriends vetted before they were allowed near. The girls of Jordan's Brook absconded often. They found the weaknesses in the building, the way children in institutions always do. A favourite was to set off the fire alarm, because the alarm automatically released the secure doors and windows. When a girl went missing, the home's response was to telephone the police, and the police, more often than not, would find her and return her within hours. It was a closed loop. A girl ran, a girl was brought back, the grade book recorded it, the week went on. Fred and Rose West understood that loop, and they used it. Fred cruised past Jordan's Brook in his Ford Transit van, offering lifts. They did not snatch the girls of Jordan's Brook. They did something more patient and more effective. They befriended them. They invited them back to Cromwell Street for orange squash and biscuits, for somewhere warm and unsupervised to sit, for an adult who would listen. Rose, not much older than the girls themselves, told them she had been in care too, that she understood. Words travelled, the way words travel between children and institutions, from Jordan's Brook and from other homes, and a steady drift of vulnerable girls found their way to the door of 25 Cromwell Street. One of them was a child the courts would later identify only as Miss A. Miss A's childhood had given her nothing to hold on to. Her parents had divorced. She had been sexually abused inside her own family. At 13, she was placed in a Gloucester children's home, and it was there that she first heard about Cromwell Street from an older girl. A house where there was a woman who would give you a drink and listen to you and tell you that you could come and cry on her shoulder any time you liked. In the summer of 1976, Miss A was moved to Jordan's Brook House. She would call in at Cromwell Street on her way to the bus station. The West sent her a card for her 15th birthday. Miss A was sexually abused by Fred and Rose West at 25 Cromwell Street. She was a child in the care of the state when it happened, and she did not report it, because she had already learned the lesson the care system teaches the children inside it. In her own understanding of herself, if you were in care, you were the one who was bad. Who would believe her over them? She survived. She would, in time, become one of the people whose evidence mattered. There is evidence that Fred and Rose West were, at some point, approved and used as foster carers. That the state did not merely fail to keep children away from 25 Cromwell Street, but on occasion placed them inside it. Rose's own brother, Graham Letts, remembered his sister looking after at least 2 foster children, a boy and a girl, who he believed were a brother and sister. They came, and they stayed for a time, and they went back. It is extraordinary that this was allowed to happen, when both Fred and Rose West had a criminal conviction, on the record, unspent, available to anyone who looked, for a violent assault of a teenage girl. The conviction from the 12th of January 1973 did not merely fail to stop them, it sat in a file while the care system used their house. This is the house that was allowed to exist. Not allowed by inattention alone, on the available evidence, on at least one occasion, allowed by appointment. Between 1972 and 1992, the West children were visited by social services on many occasions. Children were sometimes removed, sometimes they were returned. The same family surfaced in the official record again and again across 20 years, and each visit was handled in isolation as its own small event, opened and closed. No professional is recorded as having stepped back and read the whole of it at once. In 1973, the year Lynda Gough was killed, there was a medical signal that named its own cause out loud. That July, Anne-Marie West fainted at a swimming baths. She was 8 years old. A check found scratches and bruising around both of the child's breasts. Asked how she had come by them, Anne-Marie said, "Mummy does this." The child named the adult. Nothing in the record follows from it. In 1978, a teacher at Anne-Marie's school noticed the bruising on her. Social services were informed. A welfare officer visited Cromwell Street. Nothing resulted. In 1988, an anonymous caller told social services that children were being left alone at Cromwell Street. The house was visited. Nothing was found to be wrong. The index card recording that visit subsequently vanished. In 1989, one of the West children was in contact with the NSPCC. The reports generated by that contact were later found to have been shredded. There was also a child inside the house whose distress was on display in a public institution every single week and was read every single week as misbehaviour. Heather Ann West was born in October 1970. She was the eldest of Fred and Rose's own children. By every account, she was a clever, serious, capable girl. A good pupil, dark-haired, slightly self-conscious about her prominent front teeth. Her father disliked her, and he did not hide it. Lodgers heard him call her ugly, call her names, single her out. The West children were kept on a short rein because the house had secrets and the children were the likeliest leak. They were not allowed to play in the street. They were kept to the back garden and the cellar. School friends were not invited in. The children were not allowed to go out to other children's houses, and free hours were filled with chores. Heather, as she got older, would not shower after PE at school. It broke a firm school rule, and she broke it again and again. And the school responded the way the rules told it to. Heather West was sent, repeatedly, to the headmistress's office for refusing to undress and shower in front of the other girls. She wouldn't undress because of what was on her body. When she was on one occasion made to shower, a friend, Denise Harrison, saw it. Red welt marks and bruises across Heather's arms and legs. The refusal came every week. The school read it as defiance and disciplined it. It never asked what would make a careful, studious girl refuse, again and again, to undress in front of anyone. And in Heather's final week at school, in the summer of 1986, the question was not just available, it was spoken aloud. Denise Harrison came across Heather crying near Cromwell Street, and Heather told her directly what her father was doing to her at night, and that her mother did not believe her. Denise Harrison was a child herself. She did the right thing with it. She took it to her own parents. But her parents were friends of the Wests, and Mrs. Harrison's response was that Fred West would never do such a thing. The matter was let drop. A child disclosed sexual abuse, the adults who heard it knew the family, and the family's good name closed the matter. In 1978, Shirley Robinson disappeared from Cromwell Street, pregnant with Fred's child. No one reported her to the police. No search was made. The Wests told their lodgers that Shirley had gone to Germany, that she had given birth to a boy and named him Barry. That story did not stay inside the house. Sometime after the murder, a claim for maternity benefit was made to the Gloucester Social Services in Shirley Robinson's name. Because of existing claims already on file, the request was queried and letters were sent to the house. When the letters went unanswered, a worker from the Department of Health and Social Security, Peter Gregson, called at 25 Cromwell Street in person. He was told that Shirley had gone to Germany. He accepted it. Gregson has said since that he was not authorised to question what he was told, that he had to take the information at face value. There was no inquiry into Shirley Robinson's welfare. The police were never told. A third agency held the same fact and did the same nothing with it. A pregnant woman had not produced a baby, and a benefit claim had been made in her name. And that did not move the midwifery service to investigate. Health visitors who would have carried out such an investigation had a route through to the police. It was not used. After Heather West was killed in 1987, Fred told the other children a shifting series of stories about where she had gone. Out of that, inside the family, a remark took shape. That Heather was under the patio. The children said it to each other. Those who heard them say it understood it as a grim family joke. In early August 1992, acting on child protection concerns, police came to 25 Cromwell Street with a warrant to search the house for evidence of child abuse, including pornography. Fred and Rose were home with the 5 youngest children. Fred left for work while the search went on. The police seized an extensive quantity of pornographic material, 99 videotapes among it. At 9:05 that morning, Rose West was arrested for aiding and abetting the rape of a young girl and for obstructing the police. That afternoon, at 2:20, Fred West was arrested at his employer's yard and questioned about the sexual abuse of children at Cromwell Street and the rape of a 13-year-old. The 5 children were removed under emergency protection orders and placed together at a council facility where they were jointly interviewed by police and social services. The day after the search, a detective constable named Hazel Savage began to interview the friends and family of the Wests. One of the first doors she knocked on belonged to Anne-Marie, Fred's daughter, by then a grown woman living on a Gloucester council estate. It was in that interview that Anne-Marie's account of years of abuse emerged. The case that followed was built on what Savage gathered, door by door, and then, before the jury was sworn, the prosecution informed the judge that 2 key witnesses were no longer prepared to give evidence. The case collapsed. Rose's 5 younger children did not go back to Cromwell Street. They chose not to. When they later tried to make contact with Rose, she turned them away. One of the interviews carried out during that 1992 child protection process took a day and a half to complete. During it, according to the force's own account of the inquiry, a social worker recalls a child making a brief aside, the family joke, Heather under the patio. The police officer present does not recall the comment being made. At a time when the focus was on the immediate child protection issues, the force record states the comment was neither written down nor followed up. Nothing further was said until the spring of 1993, when the residential social workers caring for the West children began to hear the same comments again. The patio, laid at the same time Heather left home. By the summer of 1993, the comments carried a different weight. They were still offhand, still occasional, but they were persistent. A child in foster care said, almost in passing, that her older sister Heather was under the patio at home. Her foster mother listened. She took it seriously. What the foster mother heard did not stay in the room. It joined the concern residential staff had been raising for months, and in July and August of 1993 it reached the police. In telephone calls from a social worker and from a legal executive of the county council involved in the ongoing civil proceedings around the family. Acting on that referral, social services formally raised their concern about the whereabouts of Heather West. Detective Constable Hazel Savage, who had first encountered Fred West back in the 1960s, who had never been satisfied with the explanation she had been given about this family, was officially appointed to investigate Heather's disappearance. The same detective who had built the 1992 case The System Let Collapse was now put back on the family, alone, on one child, 11 years too late. It Extensive inquiries found no trace of Heather West alive. Early in 1994, with those inquiries exhausted, police took formal witness statements from the social workers closest to the West children, recording what the children had said about the patio. On the strength of those statements, an application was made to Gloucester Magistrates for a warrant to search 25 Cromwell Street. Fred West was not careful. He was barely literate, and the court that saw him in 1973 had judged him too docile for violence. He did not conceal what he was. He did not need to. The silence was already there for him, in the children he had frightened, in the lodgers who had left without a word, in the care system that sent girls towards his door, in the agencies that each held a fragment and never set their fragments side by side. On the 24th of February 1994, police began excavating the garden of 25 Cromwell Street. The digging did not stop at the house. Through the spring of 1994, the search moved out into the countryside around Much Marcle, where Fred West had grown up. Rena Costello, his first wife, was recovered from Letterbox Field at Kempley. Anna McFall, his lover, and her unborn child was found in Fingerpost Field nearby. Both women had been missing for more than 25 years. Neither had ever been the subject of a missing person investigation in all that time. Fred West was arrested and charged with 12 counts of murder. Fred West, in custody, talked. He talked at enormous length. He was interviewed by police on 145 separate tapes. But what he produced across those tapes was not a confession in any reliable sense. Fred West lied. He lied constantly, fluently, and without apparent purpose. He confessed to things, then withdrew them. He added victims and subtracted them. He shaped and reshaped the story depending on who was listening and what he wanted from them. Truth and fantasy had become the same thing. He was, even from a remand cell, still trying to manage the account of his own life, and still, consistently, trying to keep Rose out of it. What he said cannot be trusted to be true, but the fact that he behaved this way is itself a fact of the case, and it matters. Because the man who lied that fluently to detectives in 1994 was the same man who had been believed without difficulty by every one official who had met him for the previous 30 years. The docility the magistrates saw in 1973 was a performance. He had always been able to do this. It had always worked. On the 1st of January 1995, Fred West was found dead in his cell at HMP Winson Green in Birmingham. He had hanged himself. He was 53, on remand, awaiting trial. He had not been convicted. He was never sentenced. He never stood in front of a jury. Whatever he knew that the police never independently established, about victims never found, he took with him. Rose West went on trial alone at Winchester Crown Court in October 1995. She denied all of it. The trial ran for some 7 weeks. The prosecution was led by Brian Levison, the defence by Richard Ferguson. Against her counsel's advice, Rose West chose to give evidence in her own defence, and she spent 3 days in the witness box. She did not present well. She got her own age wrong. She made jokes. She was caught out repeatedly on the detail. The defence ran the argument that Fred had acted alone, that Rose had not known, and called a succession of women who said they had been attacked by a man who might have been Fred to support the picture of Fred as a lone predator. At Rose's own discretion, 4 of the police tapes of Fred were played to the court. What the trial turned on, in the end, was not Fred West at all. It was the survivors. Caroline Owens gave evidence at the trial of Rose West. So did Miss A, the child from Jordan's Brook. So did Anne-Marie, Fred's daughter. They told the court what had been done to them in that house across the years, and they established the thing the murder counts needed established, that Rosemary West was an active participant, not a bystander, not a frightened wife who did not know, a woman who took part. The jury was sent out on the 20th of November 1995. They returned 3 guilty verdicts first, for Charmaine, for Heather, for Shirley Robinson, the 3 killings closest to direct evidence. For the remaining 7 counts, the jury sent the judge a question. Could they return a guilty verdict where there was no direct evidence that Rose West had killed that particular victim with her own hands? Mr. Justice Mantle directed them that they could, provided they were sure of the Crown's case, and that, in weighing those murder counts, they were entitled to take into account the evidence of Caroline Owens and the other surviving woman. On the 22nd of November 1995, Rose West was convicted on all 10 counts of murder. The 7 harder counts were carried in significant part by the survivors, the people the institutions had failed in 1973, at Jordan's Brook, across 20 years of missed signals. The women the state did not protect were the ones who secured the conviction. The case was built out of its own failures, given evidence by the people who had lived through them. Mr. Justice Mantle passed 10 sentences of life imprisonment. He told her, "If attention is paid to what I think, you will never be released." Rose West was taken down. She is held in prison. She has never admitted to any of it. In 1995, the Gloucestershire Area Child Protection Committee commissioned the Bridge Child Care Consultancy to produce an overview report into the deaths of Charmaine and Heather West. The report was published at the conclusion of Rose West's trial. Hundreds of copies were distributed to the area child protection committees across England and Wales, funded by the Social Services Inspectorate. Its central finding, in the words of the report as quoted by the Gloucestershire Committee, was this: that professionals working in child protection should not lightly dismiss the comments of children, however apparently bizarre. The report largely exonerated the agencies involved. Its conclusion, as reported at the time, was that no sane person could have imagined what had been taking place at 25 Cromwell Street. The West case did not produce a statutory public inquiry. There is no document equivalent to the Byford report, the Home Office review that examined the Sutcliffe investigation paragraph by paragraph and set down what was done, what was not done, and by whom. What the West case produced was an internal review, a guidance note on listening to children, and a set of revisions that did not compel a national reckoning. In September 1997, the Sex Offenders Act 1997 came into force. It required those convicted of offences against children to notify the police of their name and address. Fred West had been convicted of such an offence on the 12th of January 1973, the day of the Caroline Owens hearing, the day of the £25 fine, the day John Smith told the Wests that prison would do them no good. The Sex Offenders Act came into force 24 years after that conviction. It came into force 24 months after Fred West's death. In 1999, the Department of Health, the Home Office, and the Department for Education and Employment jointly published a revised edition of Working Together to Safeguard Children. It replaced the version published in 1991. For the first time, it set out in statutory guidance the duty on all agencies to share information across boundaries where a child may be at risk. It codified the interagency framework for managing known and suspected sex offenders. It set out the process by which local agencies examine their own practice when a child dies. It addressed, in statutory guidance, the failures the West case had exposed, the failures the 1991 version had not prevented. It was published 4 years after Rose West's conviction, 4 years after Fred West's death. The Sex Offenders Act was real. Working Together 1999 was real. The Guidance on Listening to Children was real. Each was built in answer to the West case. Each arrived after it. Set the record of this family beside the record of the state, and what emerges is not an absence of contact, it is the opposite. A court had Fred West before it in 1961, and again in 1973. A probation officer filed a report on the children in his care in 1967. A father walked into a social services office in 1968 and named the danger to his daughter. The at-risk register, in place from 1967, should have flagged a 16-year-old raising another woman's children. A school recorded a murdered child as having moved to London. A medical examination in 1973 found injuries on an 8-year-old who said her mother had caused them. A teacher reported bruising in 1978. A benefits worker stood in the hallway of the house. An anonymous caller reported children left alone in 1988. The NSPCC was contacted in 1989. Police executed drug warrants on the building in the early 70s. A children's home, a mile away, linked vulnerable girls towards the door. The care system, on the available evidence, placed foster children inside it. Each of those was a thread held by a different hand. Police, probation, social services, schools, the DSS, the midwifery service, the NSPCC, the care system. No hand held more than one. And of the threads that were written down, several no longer exist. Charmaine's school file, destroyed on schedule. The 1988 index card, vanished. The 1989 NSPCC reports, shredded. The Caroline Owens prosecution file, destroyed by force policy. The drug warrant records, gone, but for a pocketbook. This was not confined to the West family's own paperwork. In January 1997, a report to the county's Social Services Committee, the In-Care Contacts report, recorded that of some 2,200 files held on children in the county's care, 397 could not be located. Not destroyed in a schedule, not refused, simply missing. One file in every 6. The system existed, the contacts were made, the information went into the system and the system did not connect it. And then, in places, the system did not even keep it. By 1994, there was a system built to hold an investigation like this one. Gloucestershire Constabulary had been running HOLMES since 1989. When the excavation of 25 Cromwell Street began, the incident room ran on it. Every victim, every address, every statement, indexed and cross-referenced at speed. It had nothing to index before that. Not one of the contacts this film has named, the courts, the probation report, the school, the bruising, the benefits visit, the calls, the children's home, was ever entered into it. HOLMES was not aimed at the West family, until the West family was a row of graves. The system the state has built worked exactly as designed. It held the case perfectly, once the case was the dead. The database worked perfectly on the dead. This was not a failure unique to Gloucester, or unique to the 1970s and 1980s. It was a structural problem. Agencies operating in silos, each holding its fragment, with no mechanism to force the picture into view. And it is a problem the series has already watched play out under a different name in a different decade. Ian Huntley had a documented history with the police across more than one force area. When he moved to Cambridgeshire and took a job in a school, none of that history followed him. In 2002, he murdered 2 10-year-old girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The Bishard Inquiry, reporting in 2004, found that the systems built in the years after cases like the West's the interagency guidance, the 1999 Working Together framework, had still not closed the gap. Information about a dangerous man had still failed to travel. What followed Bishard was the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act 2006 and the vetting and barring system that became the Disclosure and Barring Service. The mechanism arrived, as it always arrives in this series, after the harm. Named for the harm, too late for the people whose name it now carries. The same gap, a different address, different children. There is one more document in the record of the West case. The Bridge Child Care Consultancy completed its review of the agency contacts with the West family in 1995. The review examined what every agency had known and when between 1971 and 1994. It was never published in full. In January 2013, a member of the public requested a copy under the Freedom of Information Act. Gloucestershire County Council refused the request under Section 17. That was not the end of it. A copy of the report had been held until then in a publicly catalogued information pack at Gloucestershire Archives. After the Data Protection Act came into force in 2018, that copy was removed from the public pack. Taken out because a second copy existed in the access-controlled Social Services section of the County Council's archive. The second copy is now the only one. It is held under the reference GCC SOC 23320. It is closed for 100 years under the Data Protection Act 2018. The reason the archive gives, in its own catalogue, is the report contains reference to surviving members of the West family. It is closed until the year 2095. The fullest account of what the state knew about Fred and Rose West, and when it knew it, exists. It has been written. It has been filed. The copy that sat in the open archive has been lifted out of it, and what remains has been sealed for 100 years. Long enough that no person who failed Heather West, or Charmaine, or Caroline Owens will be alive to read it. In October 1996, Gloucester City Council demolished 25 Cromwell Street. The work was done carefully and deliberately and to a particular end. The bricks were crushed to dust. Every piece of the debris was destroyed so that nothing of the house could be taken away and kept. No brick, no fragment, no souvenir. The ground where the house had stood was cleared and landscaped and turned into a public footpath, a paved walkway running between the buildings on either side, open to the street. A person walking through Gloucester now can walk the length of Cromwell Street and pass straight through the place where the house was, and not even know it. There is no number 25. There is a gap and a path through the gap, and the city walks across it. That was the intention. The house had become a place people came to look at, and the demolition was meant to end that. To refuse it the afterlife of a landmark. It worked. The house is gone as completely as a building can be made to go. The house was crushed so that nothing of it could be kept. The report was closed so that nothing of it could be read. The brick and the paper removed by the same instinct to make the thing not there. What cannot be demolished is the record of who was lost. Lynda Gough, Caroline Cooper, Lucy Partington, Therese Siegenthaler, Shirley Hubbard, Juanita Mott, Alison Chambers, Shirley Robinson, Charmaine West, Rena Costello, Anna McFall, Heather West. And one more name which belongs in this film, although no court ever heard it. In January 1968, a 15-year-old girl named Mary Bastome disappeared from a bus stop on the Bristol Road in Gloucester. She was on her way to see her boyfriend. A Monopoly set was found scattered in the snow nearby. She had worked as a waitress at a cafe where Fred West was a regular customer. He had done building work behind it. A witness reported having seen her in his car. Mary Bastholm has never been found. When Fred West was questioned about her in 1994, he denied involvement, and then said he would tell the truth when he was ready. He was never ready. He died before any charge could be brought. In 2021, a Freedom of Information request asked Gloucester Constabulary whether any officer had ever been assigned to investigate Mary Bastholm's disappearance. The force replied that it holds no relevant information. Her case remains officially unsolved. The record of it, like so much of the record in this film, is a record of an absence. A girl who was never found, an investigation that left no trace, a file with nothing in it. The house was allowed to exist for 22 years. The city walked past it. The agencies came to the door and went away again, each holding its single fragment. The court let them walk in 1973. The records were destroyed, or shredded, or lost, or sealed. The state built a response. It built it, as it always builds it, afterwards.